People with an anxious attachment style generally attract people with an avoidant attachment style, which fucking sucks.
Because it doesn't work.
Anxious attached people need closeness.
And like constant reassurance, right?
Reassurance, for sure. You can't just disappear and expect someone that's anxiously attached to be okay with that. And I think that that's honestly kind of fair. For people with avoidant attachments, they need that space. And so that's where you butt heads and it just doesn't work, because when the anxiously attached person is feeling distance from the avoidant, they come closer and they need more. And that's when they are approaching them with, "You're making me feel like this and I really need that from you." And that actually scares the avoidant off even further. And then the anxiously attached
It's like
person,
a rubber band. Yeah.
the only way to retrieve an avoidant in that moment is to pull back. For anyone that deals with anxious attachment, you know how hard that is, especially when you're in a triggered state of mind.
Because you're so triggered. It's like you're not in the right state.
When someone that's anxiously attached is triggered, you need that validation and that reassurance. That's when you need reassurance. It's not like you need to be reassured every 5 fucking seconds.
It's when they start acting dismissive.
Yeah, it's when they pull back. When they pull back, you want to cling to them. But really, the only way to combat an avoidant as an anxiously attached person is to give them their space and pull back even further. Like, "Oh, you want your space? Here, take a mile of it."
So while I do agree that we have this vicious cycle, there's some powerful takeaways from this that I think we can expand upon in this video. Number one, there's actually a reason that we attract the same types of people and relationships over and over again. And if this is your experience, there are some powerful takeaways that may change your life that I'm going to share with you in this video. And also, we can take away these lessons or learnings or sort of breakthrough moments, hopefully you're about to have here with me, and then apply them, and we will be better off because of it for chapters and seasons of life to come. So I wanted to go through and actually share my thoughts about this video because there are some really great parts of it that definitely explain and discuss the anxious avoidant trap quite well. Things like we sort of enter into this vicious cycle. I think she referenced it as a rubber band where there's sort of this push-pull dynamic. And there absolutely is something in this anxious avoidant trap or anxious attachment and dismissive avoidant relationship that is actually called our primary trigger pattern. And how a primary trigger pattern works and what she's referring to is that exactly the biggest core trigger that we have, how we react to it when it is triggered. Okay. So how we react when that button is pushed will be the very same thing that in turn causes the other person's biggest trigger to also be pushed. So for example, you can see this go in a vicious cycle when she refers to the rubber band. You can see that an anxious attachment style, one of their biggest core wounds is the fear of abandonment. That fear gets triggered when the dismissive avoidance starts to pull away. And when the anxious attachment style gets triggered by their fear of abandonment, how they respond to their own trigger is literally to hold on more tightly, to try to get closer, which in turn triggers the dismissive avoidance biggest core fear around being trapped. And when they feel trapped, what do? They pull away, which in turn triggers the abandonment wound, which causes the anxious to hold on tighter, which then re-triggers the trapped wound, causing the DA to pull away further. And so you can see how this goes around and around. And I thought her example was great. But what I wanted to explore in this video is that there are some really big reasons why this relationship happens all the time, why people often get attracted to people with different attachment styles. I also want to take you through a little bit that isn't discussed in this video about how this relationship can work, but there are a few really core prerequisites necessary in order for that to happen. And I want to talk about something that's really powerful in terms of a lesson that comes out of the anxious avoidant trap. And so this is really the major point here. Now, I want to start by just sharing the reason, if you've ever found yourself in a position where there's an anxious attachment being so attracted to emotionally unavailable people, for example, if you find that like you have an anxious side to you in relationships and you're almost always attracted or have a huge pattern or history in relationships of being attracted to emotionally unavailable people, there's actually a really crucial reason why this happens. And it's telling you something extremely important about yourself. And what it's telling you is that that is your subconscious comfort zone. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that we are always going to be attracted to people who feel familiar. And the reason this happens is because we are wanting to invest in what's familiar, because at the end of the day, the subconscious mind is survival wired. And what's familiar is equated to safety at a subconscious level and thus survival. And so our subconscious is like, oh, we've been here before. We know that we've survived this. So we're going to survive it again. And so then we reinvest in what's familiar. Now, the big $1 million question here becomes, well, what is that familiarity made up of? What is that zone of what's familiar to us? Well, it's actually not what you think it is. It's not, oh, I'm attracted to what my parents were like or things like that, although that can play a role, as you'll see in a moment. But it's what the relationship is that you have to yourself currently. Now, yes, that can actually be largely conditioned by the relationship you had to your parents and family growing up. But what you'll see is, for example, anxious attachment style individuals are constantly attracted to emotionally unavailable people because they are emotionally unavailable to themselves. They're so busy people pleasing everybody else and focusing externally on everyone else and putting their needs last and on the back burner and trying to chameleon themselves into what they think people want from them and who they think they should be to win other people over, that of course they're attracted to people who are going to make them feel exactly the way that they make themselves feel on a daily basis, because going back to the subconscious comfort zone, that's what's familiar and thus safe. And so when we take a really big look at this, although it can be really painful and difficult to constantly be attracted to individuals that are emotionally unavailable, and it can be, especially triggering if that's caused us pain, if we have a history of being emotionally unavailable to ourselves, for example, it's also a really beautiful lesson. And it reminds me of this quote. It's a Rumi quote. And Rumi says, if I am irritated by every rub, how will I ever be polished? And so, what Rumi's getting at is the fact that everything that rubs us the wrong way, that hurts us, that affects us, is also giving us the opportunity to be polished. And I want to extend that to anybody who's been in an experience of constantly attracting the same types of people and relationships, and then feeling like, oh my gosh, why do I end up with the same type of person that triggers me so much? Well, probably because your own behavior, that is your own subconscious comfort zone, is acting that way to yourself first. And so we invest in people who will mirror that back to us. Another example of this, just for argument's sake, to make it really obvious, is like people who end up in relationships with people who are very critical often are very critical of themselves first. And so when somebody comes along that may be really critical of them, their conscious mind is like, oh, this is a red flag. This isn't good. But their subconscious mind says, oh, but this is familiar. And there's something about it we're drawn to. And something you really want to remember is that your conscious mind really isn't running the show. Your conscious mind is responsible for 3 to 5% of your daily beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and actions. Your subconscious mind is 95 to 97%. And that's really the part of you, that programmed autopilot part of self, is really the part of you making all these decisions to begin with. I never saw in private practice, and I worked in private practice for like 10 years basically, and saw somewhere between 40, sometimes up to 50 people a week. And, so a ton of client sessions. And I never saw a person who left a relationship with a narcissist, coming out of a really painful relationship with somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. I never saw somebody in that circumstance or experience who first didn't really have 4 major attributes. They were highly critical of themselves. They didn't empathize with their own feelings because they hyper empathize with everybody else, kind of at the expense of their own self. It's like they weaponize their empathy against themselves. They violated their own boundaries quite frequently, and they manipulated themselves to be what they thought other people needed from them. So, what you have is that person, they start dating around, and then they find somebody who's critical, who manipulates them, who doesn't empathize with them, who violates their boundaries. And although the conscious mind says this is a red flag, these are unhealthy patterns, the subconscious mind says, oh my gosh, this is so familiar. We really like this. So there's a really big backstory to why the anxious avoidant trap happens. And I thought it was really important to acknowledge. And I want to tell you 2 other extremely, hopefully life-changing things for you. If you're interested in helping make a huge impact on other people's lives while also building financial freedom, I'm offering an early bird 50% discount on our integrated attachment theory relationship certification program that will help you become a certified integrated attachment theory relationship coach and build your own thriving practice by the end of 12 weeks. This 12-week on-demand program will help you kickstart your new career by teaching you revolutionary tools and strategies that help clients transform their lives and relationships. Build your own coaching practice and set yourself up for a waitlist of clients and financial success. Even if you have no coaching experience, this program will give you very in-depth tools, resources, and confidence to get started in a matter of weeks. And you can learn more information by clicking the link down below. We can have different attachment styles. We can have wounds. And, what's really interesting is that if you look at the anxious avoidant trap, and if you look at most relationships, exactly what each person needs to work on for the relationship to work also happens happens to be what each person needs for themselves to heal. And what I mean by this is like you'll see what does an anxious attachment style need to learn in order to be in a relationship that's functional with somebody who's more dismissive avoidant. They need to learn to have their own boundaries. They need to learn to have a strong sense of self and to regulate themselves and self-soothe by learning to meet their own needs. And they really need to they need to exit out of codependency and enter into interdependency, which is the ability for them to have that sense of self and meet their own needs, but also regulate through the other person. Likewise, what the dismissive avoidant person needs to heal is they need to be able to start being vulnerable, opening up, exit counterdependency, and move into the center, make healthier compromises, learn to co regulate, open themselves up for giving and receiving to others more. And that allows them to be very much healed on their own. That's very healing for them to do that work. They also need to be able to work on sharing more openly, knowing what their needs are and actually being able to support other people and see that they have the room and the bandwidth and the resources to do so, and that it actually fills them up. But in order for that to happen, both people need to be, and here's the $1 billion question or statement, both people need to be willing to do that work. And if we don't have that, that's where we're going to see that the relationship becomes dysfunctional and problematic and sometimes even toxic if that relationship goes on for a very long time and there's no exit out of the old autopilot patterns. So, this idea that the relationship doesn't work. I mean, I've been in this field for a long time with many, many clients, and I've seen this relationship transform completely the anxious avoidant trap into two securely attached people thriving in a relationship together that took the lessons that each other's triggers and wounds and pain points brought to them and brought those things to the surface and evolved through them. But they both had to be willing. It can't just be one person doing the work on their own. And the last thing I want to say before I wrap this video, and if you want to go in, by the way, to a course that I have fully for free, it's called How to Repair Any Relationship. And I'll put the link down to it below, but it actually allows you to dive in and to work through exactly the lessons that are showing up in your relationship. If you're going through a rocky period, if you're going through a challenge or set of challenges, there's probably a really good reason that's happening. And there's probably some really powerful lessons that's trying to show to you or communicate to you. Just like that Rumi quote, right? If I'm irritated by every rub, how will I ever be polished? Every hard thing is an opportunity for polishing, is an opportunity for healing, for loving yourself more deeply, for gaining insight and understanding yourself and taking those lessons forward with you into future aspects and areas of life and into future relationships and future seasons where those lessons may be required to be applied. But as human beings, we have to be willing to do that work, to make those compromises, to get out of those old autopilot conditioned patterns that we had from our own childhood. And I think it's really important to just remind everybody to look for that, to look for a partner to even vet for a partner who's going to be willing to do those things with you, because that's the crux of how our relationships thrive. And if we aren't seeing those types of patterns, that's how we will feel defeat instead. So I hope this makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you for watching. Thanks for stopping by. If you want to see more videos like this, please like, share, subscribe, comment that you like this video. I'll do more of this kind of format of things. And I can't wait to see you in future videos. Thanks for stopping by.